Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsa Chanora Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us. We are now beginning chapter 17 of the Bhagavad Gita. And there's a beautiful introduction to this chapter, so I don't have to come up with an introduction to it because Jnanadev has a beautiful few verses singing the praises of Lord Ganesha, who presides over beginnings. So he's starting a new chapter. So he decides to praise Lord Ganesha as the Lord presiding over beginnings. And then he gives us a bonus after that, but I'll tell you in a moment. Homage to you, Lord Ganesha, the Guru whose concentrated meditation releases the hold of the universe of names and forms. To those who are ignorant of your true nature, you seem to have an unusual face. Yet, to the learned, your appearance is quite understandable. Your divine eyes look small, yet with their opening and closing, you easily bring about the creation and dissolution of the universe. Then Jnanadev dives into very deep, non-dual poetry, something that's of the level of the Upanishads, but in beautiful poetry. The wonderful thing is that with whomsoever you form a relationship, that person is at once deprived of that relationship. It's coming. As soon as you remove the fetters of mundane existence, the feeling that you are the very brother of the world is created, and the sense of satisfaction felt by your devotees never wanes. With the eradication of the sense of duality, that duality through which you had created separation, the devotee forgets the existence of his separate body form. That's why there's no relationship, right? You remain hidden for those who look at you as distinct from their own selves. And even though you are right in front of their eyes, they run here and there to find you. You never even remain in the proximity of those who meditate upon you with rapt concentration. Why not? But you become dear, but one becomes dear to you who forgets such meditations through his oneness with you. In other words, the person feels so much oneness with Ganesha, with the Lord, that he can't even imagine meditating on Ganesha because he's so identified with him. One who does not know that you are the eternal self conducts himself as if he is all-knowing. How can you be expected to hear such a person, since you are not prepared to lend your ear even to the Vedas that proclaim your greatness? Then how could one harbor the ambition of singing your praise? Whatever is perceptible is all born of Maya. Then how and in what way should one worship you? Looking upon you as deity, if I seek to be your servant, then it would mean taking myself to be distinct from you, which exposes my disloyalty to you. It would therefore be only proper not to establish any kind of relationship with you. It is only when one drops all distinctions that one can attain you, O One, without dualities. I have now come to know this secret of yours, you, O adorable one. What a beautiful way to start that chapter. Then he goes on with praise of his guru. The salt does not exist separately but gets dissolved in the cooked food. Accept my homage to you in that way. What more can I say? An earthen jar dipped in water comes up overflowing with water when drawn out. A wick becomes the lamp itself by associating with a lighted lamp. In that way, O Guru Nivrittinath, I have attained perfection by bowing to you. I now set myself to the work of interpreting the teaching of the Gita. Such humility, but wisdom. And he continues to say, in the concluding stanza of chapter 16, the Lord gave the ever-abiding decision. Therefore, let the scriptures be your only authority in ascertaining what should be done and what should not be done. Having known what is said in the scriptures, perform action as they ordain. There, Arjuna thought to himself, how is this? Is there no alternative but the scriptures alone for action? Some people might, who are participating in the class, think, are the scriptures the only way to grow? And then he, Jnanadev speaks on Arjuna's behalf. It is like insisting to wrench out the snake gem from the mighty cobra Takshaka's hood by stamping on his hood. So there's this giant cobra, and this guy is insisting that you must jump on his head in order to get the gem out of his head. Who's going to be able to do that? Or it's like pulling out the hair from the nostrils of a lion and then knitting these together into an ornament for wearing around the neck. And if you can't do this, then you're going to have to remain bare-necked. There's nothing else to wear except for something from the cobra or the lion. And he says, it is highly degrading. Who would be able to and how to bring together the loose, divergent opinions propounded in different scriptures and secure a clear conclusion as a result of their understanding? Assuming that such an understanding is secured, is there enough time to give a concrete shape to that decision? How can one find leisure in his lifetime to get through such an intricate affair? And how would everybody be able and fortunate enough to secure the means to bring about the coordination of, number one, the scriptures, number two, their interpretations, number three, the place, and number four, the time? All these conditions have to be fulfilled, right? It is thus very difficult to perform actions strictly according to scriptures, and under these conditions, how will the dull-witted seekers fare? The solution to this is discussed in this chapter. So, I think we can all identify with Arjuna. It's like, I'm barely catching up with the classes, or I don't understand what Swami is talking about, or what Jnanadev is talking about. And chapters 13 through 15 were really torturous, so please, don't torture me anymore, So we can understand Arjuna's dismay. Just because we're studying the Gita, he's in the middle of the Gita, and he studied the Upanishads and everything before. So the the Upanishads are even more difficult. And basically all of the Vedic texts are full of symbolism and very mystic language. And as a result, it often feels kind of contradictory. And even in the itihasas means the Mahabharata and Ramayana. In those, there are seeming contradictions also. So some people even question their validity or their pertinence in today's world. And if we follow the traditional way, this is what Arjuna is thinking, because it's about 5,300 years ago that he spoke this question to Krishna. And he learned in the traditional way. So the Vedas are supposed to be learned along with what is called the Angas and the Upangas. What is Anga and Upanga? It sounds like Uga Buga, right? So the 6 Angas are, the first 4 of the 6 are basically about Sanskrit. Sanskrit phonetics, Sanskrit grammar, Sanskrit etymology. First 3, sorry. And the next is Kalpa, which is basically the rituals, like we do in Amma's ashram, but an older version of it. And Chandis, which is the meter of all these chants, like the Vedic chants and the Bhagavad Gita chant, all that the prose, it's not prose, it's in a particular meter. So there's many of these meters, and then this is the study of those, so people can remember how to chant the Vedas and such scriptures properly. And the 6th and last one is Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology. So you had to learn all of these things properly, not just scratching the surface. There was no Wikipedia or Google in those days, so you had to really, truly learn it. And then on top of that, you have to learn 4 approaches to spiritual philosophy, which is the Upangas. And a thorough study of all these subjects is going to take decades. But the same kind of tradition was existing in Europe, and it was well known that it was documented also historically that in Wales, somewhere in Wales, I forget the location, the Druids took 20 years to teach and learn their teachings, their scriptures, whatever it was, and it took 20 years. And they were not allowed to write anything down. They had to just memorize it. That's how it was in the Vedic times. Also, you had to memorize it. Imagine how long that will take. So the question is, can everyone study the Vedas and understand them? If a person does not study the Vedas, what's going to happen to them? A person may be religious, sincere, and have a desire to be a good person. So is it their fault if they have no access to such opportunities? So like this, Arjuna's question is about a person who has faith but no knowledge, and he wants to know what happens to them. And this question forms the seed of the entire chapter. So let us chant verse 1 and hear his question and the commentary on it. First we have to chant the beginning part, which is on the top in Sanskrit, but you can repeat after me. Ata Saptadashodhyayaha Saptadashodhyayaha. And then the next words are one line down after chapter 17. You can see the Sanskrit there. Shraddha Traya Vibhaga Yoga. And then you skip the Sanskrit below if you cannot read it. And then you can see the Romanized Sanskrit. Arjuna Uvacha Ye Shastra Vidhim Utsrajya Yajante Shraddhayanvitaha Tesham Nishtatu Sorry. Tesham nishtatu ka Krishna satvamaho rajastamaha. The meaning I did not change at all. Arjuna said, those who are endowed with faith and those who, casting aside the injunctions of the Shastra, which means scriptures, perform sacrifice, which is their condition. What is their condition, O Krishna? Is it sattva, rajas, or tamas? So let's look at the commentaries. And by the way, casting aside might be a little bit strong wording for what they're talking about, because Arjuna's question is about people that are presumably innocent. They're not doing it intentionally. So casting aside just means like they don't know. They have no clue about those injunctions. So, the result is that they're casting them aside, so to speak. Shankaracharya says this two words, those who, refers to those who are endued with faith. For example, they think that there's something beyond, and they observe the conduct of the learned people, and then they worship following what they observe, but they are unaware of the procedure laid down in the scriptures. So they're trying, but they really don't know what they're doing, basically. On the other hand, those who, while knowing the injunctions of the scriptures, set them aside and worship the gods contrary to those injunctions, cannot be the intended subject here, because they have studied, they have full faith, and they should be able to do it properly. So we're not talking about these people who are just intentionally, flagrantly ignoring those injunctions. That's the point that he wants to make. And because Arjuna is a person who has studied the scriptures, this question is not even relevant for himself. So he's asking it on behalf of those people who have faith but not access to scriptures. In other words, it's really a question coming from compassion, so it's a good question and an honest one. Anyone is free to worship God, and we have no role in judging them for what they worship. Even if they don't know anything about the traditional injunctions, there are many stories in the Puranas and the Itihasas that talk about people who are totally uneducated, or so-called forest dwellers, who won over the love of, or they won the grace of love for just being so pure-hearted and innocent. So doesn't matter whether they have really learned things traditionally. The one condition, though, is that it should be for selfless reasons. So just because you didn't get a chance to study the scriptures doesn't mean that you can come up with something and make a business out of it, right? It's not for money, it's not for getting something back from God, it's just out of love for God, or out of a yearning for world peace or something like that. Then there's no negative results. Amma has confirmed that. You will never have any bad outcome if you pray for world peace or just your love for God, even though you don't know what you're doing. It's only when you want something out of that for yourself that you will have bad results if you make a mistake. So once a devotee asked Amma, is it possible to know God for those of us ordinary people? What do you think Amma said? Of course not. Amma would never say that, right? Her response was so beautiful. This guy says, I don't remember if it was a man or a woman, us ordinary people. So Amma says, children, God is also ordinary at all times, and therefore not difficult to know. But there is one thing. The ignorant ones who are drowning themselves in worldliness cannot know the truth. In other words, they're deluding themselves. So how can they know the truth? Whoever it may be, one who has sincere interest can know and see God. So there's hope for all of us. And Krishna begins his answer from the next verse. to which Shankaracharya gives a little bit of a preface. Seeing that such a general question cannot be answered without reference to the various aspects of it, the Blessed Lord said, and then we go into verse 2. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Trividha Bhavati Shraddha Dehinam Sasvabhavaja Satviki Rajasi Chaiva Tamasi Cheti Tam Shrunu. I didn't change anything here either. These are pretty straightforward verses. The Blessed Lord said, threefold is the faith of the embodied, that includes us, which is inherent in their nature. The sattvic, rajasic, and the tamasic. Do you hear of it? So he hasn't explained it yet. He's saying, this is what I'm going to tell you. And the commentaries also have something to say here. You would think it's kind of a preliminary verse. So why aren't there any, why do we need commentary? So Shankaracharya's commentary says, this inherent in their nature, this inherent in their nature means the samskara or tendency made up of the latent impressions of their actions from past births that may be good or bad, dharmic or adharmic. So when we say inherent in their nature, don't think that it's the Atma nature. That's a different story. We'll get to that in a moment. But basically the effect of this sattva, rajas and tamas are on the faith determines the worship of the gods. So everybody has that influence on them due to their inner nature. And we're going to hear about yakshas and rakshas and pretas and pisajas later. Different types of beings that one can worship, either intentionally or out of ignorance. And Jnanadev says, speaking on Krishna's behalf, Arjuna, I know the bent of your mind. You are feeling the study of the scriptures as a great handicap. You appear to cling only to faith for the attainment of the Supreme Being. But it is not so easy. It is not proper to merely say, I have faith, and depend upon it. Just think, one should not drink or eat anything contained in a liquor pot. I guess in those days, liquor was just completely sinful. It's not meant as an insult to modern day habits, I don't believe. So you should not drink or eat anything contained in a liquor pot, even though it might be the holy water of the Ganges. That's a pretty strict injunction, huh? Does not sandalwood, even though pleasantly cool by itself, burn the fingers holding it once it is set on fire? Yes. Similarly, faith by itself is a very pure principle. Yet the being to whose lot it goes is naturally constituted of the three gunas, the three qualities. So we learned about the gunas a few chapters ago. And so you can understand now in this chapter just how important that teaching was for the further chapters, because we're going to hear about sattva, rajas, and tamas many, many times in this chapter. If you are not familiar with those terms, then you can try to access the earlier chapters when we talked about it, or the Gita talked about it in detail. And those gunas come from the eternal power of Maya. So they're not going to go away, that's the point. Of the three, sattva, rajas, tamas, one of those three two of those three get weakened, while the third becomes strong and dominates over the tendency of the being. If you've got three things and one guy is stronger than the other two, that guy is going to dominate your life. The mind follows these tendencies that comes from the dominant guna, while the actions follow the mind. And then after death, the being is reborn in a new body in accordance with the actions of his or her past life. So the gunas are so important. You know, if you allow one or the other, like anything other than sattva, to dominate our lives, our worship, our sadhana, everything is going to be dominated by that. And he goes on to say, the seed form is disintegrated and develops into a tree. The tree form ends and is stored up in the seed form. This cycle goes on for countless years. Yet the tree genus does not become extinct. In that way, innumerable births and deaths take place, yet the being is invariably accompanied by the three gunas. Hence, their form of faith is also based on these three gunas. In other words, we're not going to get rid of the gunas, so we're not going to get rid of their effect on our faith. Like Amma, Krishna's response always answers more than what the original question requires, because their goal is to lead us all the way to God realization. So they're going to add in whatever they feel is going to help us reach that goal, not just what we asked about. So even if we ask the wrong question, Amma, Krishna, will still provide a response that helps us get closer to the ultimate goal of life. And the method of teaching is one that trains us to choose the right things in life, even when we are not in Amma's presence. So they're not just interested in responding to the one little question. They want to do it in such a way that we can actually apply that same principle in other things of life. And you see Amma doing that every morning with these little kids. You know, she'll be taking the same concept and like putting in a different context, or seeing if they can still get the kids, and even the adults were sometimes we're dumbfounded as well. So that's the idea. For that, we need to understand the fundamental principles of spirituality and be convinced of their application in our life. So here I want to share another Amma story. A man named Padmanabhan. He was a temple goer, and he never imagined just how much Amma would change his life when he met her. He had heard of her but hadn't met her yet. But his perspective on spirituality shifted dramatically after seeing how Amma sings bhajans through her tears. These days you don't see it as much, but you know, when she was just free and just a few people there in Amritapuri, even before I met her, she would just cry all the time, tears of bliss. And he was, you know, amazed when she would go into samadhi, and even such a guru joins her disciples in very hard physical work. So all of this changed his understanding of spirituality. And one day he asked Amma, a lot of people don't recognize the greatness of devotion at all. And many of the people who go to temples and pray daily don't seem to lead very spiritual lives. And Amma's response was, there is a belief that devotion means going to a lot of temples to worship hundreds of deities. The devotion of such people is blind faith and is not based on an understanding of any spiritual principles. Others who see this may think that is all there is to devotion, and will criticize anything to do with devotion because they have seen only the surface part, right? Spiritual people, however, will not oppose tattvatile bhakti, which means devotion based on spiritual knowledge or spiritual principles. We should understand that God realization is the aim of life and worship Him with this goal firmly fixed in our mind. Devotion in principle. That means recognizing that it is the one and same God who manifests in all living beings and in all the deities, in all names and forms. It means it needs surrendering selflessly to that God. That is the kind of devotion we should have. And that's the only kind of devotion Amma teaches everybody. But it's a good thing to remember, because sometimes we get sidetracked, and we have to remember that no, I don't need 10,000 pictures of deities on my altar. I just need one. And if Amma's your guru, then having a picture of Amma should cover everything. So, because the guru is the symbol of everything for us. And through close and prolonged contact with the guru, we have ultimately acquired the discernment and a practical form of knowledge. Practical here means we have understood basic spiritual principles, which we can then apply in our lives in various situations. It's not enough to just, understand it in one incident. And that's why Amma never commands people, because she wants them to figure it out themselves. Even though she is teaching and tells us over and over and again, if it doesn't sink in, she will still not command us. She will teach us. And so she doesn't command, because that wouldn't engender any spiritual knowledge. And it may even lead to a mistaken application of the command. Knowledge really is what gives permanent benefit to us. Like the old adage, give a man a fish and you will feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. This is Amma's intention. She wants to train us for a whole lifetime and all of our future lifetimes. So Krishna is doing the same thing. He's going to make Arjuna understand the right answer to his own question by teaching the reasons behind that answer, that correct answer. So we're not talking about people, who have studied the Shastra, the scriptures, and follow it. It refers to people who have no understanding of genuine spirituality. They may have a PhD in some academic area, but in terms of spirituality, they're still kindergartners. And what I wanted to say about that inner nature, which here we're using the word swabhava, that only stands for their mental character. In this case, swabhava means natural state, or one's natural state, which we might think, oh, it's the Atma. No, here it doesn't mean the Atma, because the Atma is more properly represented by the word swarupam. Swarupam means your original form. And your original form is formlessness, right? So that's the Atma. But this is Swabhava, and which means their mental inclination, the tendencies that are in the subtle body. And this is also sometimes called Prakriti, which we saw in chapter 3, verse 33, when Lord Krishna said, creatures follow their own nature. Even the enlightened person acts according to their own nature. What can restraint accomplish? Now, someone would say, well, okay, maybe Amma's enlightened, so is she acting according to her nature, her vasanas? No. Amma does not have to do all these things. She's assuming that and she's enacting it. She speaks her language, whatever she grew up with. Everything about her, in the kind of superficial areas is just typical southern Kerala, southern India, Kerala person. Even her attire. But that doesn't mean anything in terms of spirituality. The important part is the inner form. And that inner form is a enlightened being. So don't get confused about it. Amma's not trying to restrain her vasanas like we are. And now let's go on to verse 3. Sattvanurupa Sarvasya Shraddha Bhavati Bharata Shraddha Mayo Yam Purusho Yo Yat Shraddha Sa Eva Saha. I did change a little bit here. I made a man into beings, and his was there, he is people, and so on. Just a few, making it a little more neutral. The faith of beings, which is a clarification from Shankaracharya, beings, is according to their natural mental disposition, O descendant of Bharata. Indeed, people are what their faith is. Shankaracharya says that each means every living being. So not just applying to human beings, just like cats and dogs, they have their nature, right? So you would be surprised if the dog started going meow, right? So they stick to their dharma, they have a nature. And when he says the sattva, this is in the antakarana, that it means the subtle body basically. And that nature is not, in other words, he's pointing out that it's not the Atman, it is what we bring with us each birth, our subtle body and all the characteristics it holds. He says specific tendencies or samskara. This is pretty much the same thing. Jnanadev says, in short, there is no separate existence for faith independent of the gunas, like we were saying a little while ago. You cannot separate the faith from the gunas. It's going to have some flavor, so to speak. It'll be, sattva, rajas, or ganas, or tamas. Even though the faith is natural, it takes different forms when colored by the gunas. In this way, the entire universe is cast solely in the mold of faith. A tree is identified by its flowers, or the mind known from one's words, while actions of past lives are known from the sort of pleasure and pain one experiences in the present life. In that way, three kinds of faith are known from different signs, which you will hear about next. Not yet, we have to go finish this verse, but that's the next one. A more modern commentary says, a stone soars up in the sky to the extent momentum is imparted to it. If you throw it really powerfully, it's going to go high. A tree grows up in tune with its inherent vitality. A lotus shoots up along with the rise in the level of the water in the pond. Similarly, a person rises in their worth and attainments corresponding to the faith or shraddha with which they are endowed. They are nothing more and nothing less than what their shraddha, their faith, is. The faith or shraddha in a person manifests itself in various ways. So this verse is just kind of an explanation of the previous verse where Krishna said faith is born from our inner nature or swabhava. And most importantly, that swabhava, being the subtle body, is the mind. And so like Lord Buddha said, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. It's the very first verse of Dhammapada. So perfect for this context, because we're making our own world, including our faith, including the deity that we worship. So making the world includes our beliefs, our faith. We can even understand a lot about a person's personality just by asking them, what are your beliefs? So a person, when you ask them, they may say, I don't believe in God or scriptures. But you find out that they believe in justice, humanitarianism, selfless service, and so many other, virtues. So this shows that they have a high level of maturity, and we can assume that, especially in this case, they will soon find their own version of spirituality. And that's the beautiful thing about Amma, she accepts all forms of spirituality. Someone can come and say, I want a mantra for trees, or I want a mantra for nature, I want a nature for light, whatever, confidence or something like that. They have a concept, and that's their understanding of faith, and Amma gives them a mantra for that. So, but to advance on the path, the only way is to have the guidance of a living Satguru. That might be a painful truth for some people, but you can try. Go ahead and try, and then come back when you're fed up. Ultimately, a person's beliefs will form their personality, and their life will be governed by those beliefs. Those who believe in money, what are they going to do? I mean, most people are like that today. They will always think and talk about money, how to get it, how to preserve it, and how to take up somebody else's money, whatever it is. And of course, their actions will just become an enactment of what they think and discuss. So by teaching and spreading genuine spirituality all around the world, Amma is changing people's beliefs. And as a result, she is changing their thoughts, words, and actions. Even in this ashram, there are families that used to give a lot of importance to socializing, going to parties and other functions, which is normal. It's not a criticism. But the thing is that after they met Amma, their priorities changed completely. Now Amma is their highest priority, so their thoughts, words, and actions are all tied to Amma. So the point of this example is just to show how huge of a contrast Amma can bring about in a person's life for the better. Now, if we look at Krishna's explanation over the next few verses, it's going to be like this. He talks about the three types of vasanas, which we already heard about, sattva, rajas, tamas. These are the three main, characteristics in the whole universe. And then the next level he's brought us to is three types of faith, which are based on those vasanas. They're basically vasanas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Yes, sattva is also a vasana of sorts. It's the best vasana you can have. But ultimately we want to go all of these things, to transcend all of them. And after the three types of faith, he's going to talk about the three types of activity which are based on the faith. So of many activities, Krishna decides to start with puja, or we can call it yajna, or simply worship. It's interesting because Arjuna only asked about faith, but Krishna is already broadening the scope, because from the type of worship, you can know the type of faith a person has. Faith is not something that you can see, although a lot of people try to show off their faith through external, paraphernalia or acting up their faith. But it is ultimately an inner attribute which can never be seen. It can only be inferred when it takes a physical form. And best thing we have initially is worship. So that's what's going to come next. The three types of yajna that reveal the three types of faith. Verse 4. Yajante satvika devan yaksha rakshamsi rajasaha pretan pretan bhuta ganamschanye yajante tamasa janaha. Sorry, I just realized that I didn't do the reading through for the other three verses, so let's do that if you don't mind. Going back, go back to yeah, great, okay. Let's chant it together because that was our format before. I don't want to break that. Slowly, starting from Arjuna Uvacha. Arjuna Uvacha Ye Shastra Vidhimutsrija Yajante Shraddhayanvitaha Tesham Nishtatu Ka Krishna Sattvamahorajastamaha. Sri Bhagavanuvacha Trividha Bhavati Shraddha Dehinam Sa Swabhavaja Satviki Rajasi Chaiva Tamasi Cheti Tam Shrinu Sattvanurupa Sarvasya Shraddha Bhavati Bharata Shraddha Mayoyam Purusho Yo Yat Shraddha Sa Eva Saha. Now the last one. Yajante Satvika Devan Yaksharaksham Sirajasaha Pretan Bhuta Ganam Chanye Yajante Tamasa Janaha. Good. The translation. Sattvic people worship the gods. Rajasic people worship the demigods and demons. I'm just adding in the missing words. And the tamasic people worship the ghosts and the spirits. Okay. So Jnanadev, his explanation is quite helpful. Those molded of sattva faith have generally the liking for heaven. This is, don't forget, this is 750 years ago. They didn't think, like these days in India, I'm told that going to heaven means going to the US. Nobody wants to wait for death to come to go to heaven. So we're trying to build castles in this sky of Maya here, before dying. So it means a heavenly lifestyle is probably what we would say in the modern or in the current day. They master all arts and sciences and perform select sacrificial rites. They even get admission in the region of gods. Those who are formed of Rajas faith worship the demons and other spirits living in ethereal regions, in other words, different dimensions. The tamas-dominated faith is a heap of sins, very coarse and cruel. You wouldn't expect it to be anything good, right? Tamas. Those of tamasic faith kill beings as ritual offerings and worship on dirty funeral grounds at evening hours, invoking assemblies of ghostly orders and departed spirits. You know, you might think it's like a crazy thing, but it actually happens. You know, I right after I got my brahmachari diksha in, I think it was November of, not the diksha, but when I went to Nepal, it was November of 1997. And I was so excited because they had so many temples. And I wanted to go to a temple, and I started going there. And then the closer I got to it, I found all these butchers and all kinds of, you know, dead animals all over the place. And then I saw in the gutter, there was blood flowing in the gutter. And I was like, what is this? And I asked somebody who spoke English. They said, they're in the temple, they're sacrificing animals. I was shocked. I just turned around and left. I had no idea that people were doing these things even today. It was very shocking. And even once when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, one, I guess you could say, seeker of sorts, invited me to come with him to the graveyard to meditate. And I thought, what kind of a spirituality is that? So anyhow, that may be just my own reaction. And he continues to say, I have explained them to you with the sole objective that you should seek only the sattva faith. He's speaking on Krishna's behalf, right? So he's going into all this detail just so that we understand that we don't want anything but sattva. Those who claim the sattva faith as their protector have nothing to fear about becoming one with their beloved deity. In other words, it's guaranteed. Even though they might not have studied the Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutras are the highest and most difficult scriptures. Even if they are not well versed in the scriptures, even if they have not grasped the great teachings. Basically, if you're pure-hearted and you're sincere, you can actually reach the goal. And then he goes on to say, one succeeds with great difficulty in lighting a lamp, while another, without any trouble, lights his own lamp from the first. Does the latter in any way get cheated in respect to the light? Would a tank satisfy the thirst only of the one who constructed it and no one else? Therefore, one with firm faith, following the footsteps of another person who knows the scriptures more, if such a person learns according to their own intellect, they will secure liberation even though they may be illiterate. Some people may have an objection to that from the traditional standpoint, but I think Amma would agree that she loves that story about the uneducated man who wanted to see Kali, and he basically snuck inside and he opened the doors of the sanctum sanctorum, which you never should do without permission, and he sees Kali, and she's got all these arms, and he was so excited, and Kali was angry because he broke the rules, and then she was being so scary, but this boy was so innocent. He said, "Look, mother, when you sneeze, which hand is going to hold your nose?" They all go at the same time. What are you going to do? And it was so cute that Kali's anger was subsided and she hugged him. And I think the story goes that he merged in her, something like that. So Amma loves this story. She talks about it all the time. So I think we can understand that. We can understand that as her feeling that this is at least proper for us. Maybe not everybody. She might tell someone else, don't be childish. You should immerse yourself in Vedanta. Who knows? That's her prerogative. We can't say anything about that. In this verse, though, Krishna is only going to touch on the object, or we could say Devata, the beloved deity of their worship. The other two factors that are coming later, there's going to be 3 total. The other 2 will come in the following verses. But putting them all together, these 3 reveal what type of worship the person has. So the first one is Devata, which we're getting in this verse, the object of their worship. And then next week we're going to hear about the method, or we could say their motive. The method or mode. And the third is the motive. What are they trying to get out of that worship? So what does Krishna say about their object, or the Devata, the beloved deity that they're worshipping? Sattvic people, pure-hearted people, or not pure-hearted, or we could say people who have a balanced mind, a purified mind. What do? They worship the gods, or we could say devas. My interpretation or my understanding of it would be the kind of deities that people bring to Amma when they're asking for a mantra. And I do remember when one person came to Amma, this was in a country not to be named, and he came up. I was the one standing next to Amma, and I said, "So what is your deity? What did you choose for your mantra?" And he said, "Satan." And I said, oh, Satan, And then I said, can you just wait for a second? I want to check and see if this is valid. And he's okay. I had to wait a long time because I was thinking, how am I going to ask Amma, you know? And then finally I got up the courage. This was a long time ago. It was before 2001, I know that. And I said to Amma very hesitantly, he wants a mantra for Satan. And Amma says, she says, okay, tell him to get it from Satan. So don't try that one. You're not going to get it from her. Because basically, it's not that we, are concerned about Satan. The idea is that, it's a symbol of all the bad things in life. All the things we're trying to overcome. So if you're saying, I want you to give me a mantra for weakness, it's like, why would she do that? She wants you to be strong. She wants you to be blissful. So I want a mantra for sorrow. She's not going to do that for you. So there are some limitations. It can be one of the traditional ones. It can be light. It can be nature. It can be universe. It can be love. All these things are, for Amma, they're acceptable forms. So they're worshipping one of those valid things. Rajasic people worship what we can only call really demigods in English. But here they call, in the Sanskrit, it's yakshas and rakshas. We'll learn more about them in a moment, but they are basically higher than human beings, but lower than gods. So we have gods like Ganapati or, Shiva, those absolute principles. They're not that level. They're not like a real god. They're demigods, but they're better than human beings in terms of their spiritual advancement. Now, if you remember, there were 7 heavenly worlds, right? And they started with Earth. Believe it or not, this is supposed to be one of the heavens. So don't think that hell is going to be better than this. And the highest heaven is called Satyaloka. And then in between, they have 5, which I'll just go name it just for the reference. Bhuvarloka, Swarloka, Maharloka, Janaloka, and Tapaloka. And the reason why I said all those names is because it is said that many different types of beings live in those 5 worlds. And those are what we would call something like yakshas, rakshas, and also gandharvas. It's a different, when we say world, it's not a planet somewhere in the universe. It's a different dimension. It's a different, that's all we can say. It's a different form of life that we cannot access in this form. So what's a yaksha? That word yaksha comes in some of the scriptures, even in the Upanishads, like Kenoparishad. It comes, the people are talking about a yaksha. So they're like nature spirits that are usually benevolent. So it's not so bad, but still doesn't quite qualify as a god. And Gandharvas are celestial beings who are highly attuned to music, and they also are very good at it. So Amma says that if you make mistakes when you're playing music in front of a lot of people or something like that, she says, if you're doing it just with pure love, it's okay by yourself. But otherwise, she says, it annoys these subtle beings. And once, you may have heard the story, I think it was Paramatmananda Swami was playing the harmonium, or maybe it was Ramakrishnananda Swami, was playing the harmonium and he played a wrong key. And right at that time, Amma was doing that dance of Kali, and she had this sword in her hand. And right when he did the wrong note, she, took her sword and went wham, right on top of the harmonium, just about an inch away from his fingers. And it's like, you better be careful. So she takes it very seriously. She doesn't talk about it much these days. But subtle beings, she used to tell us in Amritapuri, we have to take down our laundry every day before 5 p.m. because after that the subtle beings start, in twilight they like to go around, fly around the ashram grounds. And when you have your laundry, it annoys them, so you have to go get it. And she even told someone, and I did it sometimes too, after 5 o'clock, we go there and take all the clothes that are still on the clothesline and just throw them in a heap. And we did that because that's the only way to learn. And you have to look through all the clothes to find yours. And Raksha are basically, I'll tell you more about them, but they're not so benevolent at all. They're kind of the lowest of these demigods. And the most important point is that they are supposedly rajasic deities. But then, of course, highly rajasic people are going to be attracted by such rajasic deities. And in this category is where Kubera comes. So people go all the way to Badrinath, which is thousands of kilometers or miles. It's right on the border of India and Tibet. So you go all the way there, and then what they do is, you could go there and pray to Lord Shiva, but instead they go right to the statue of Kubera. Why? Because it is said he's the god of wealth. So it's said that if you put a 1 rupee coin in his hand, 1 rupee is like 1.3 cents, okay? You just it's like putting a penny in Kubera's hand, then you take it back, and it's said that your wealth will multiply. Wow. Even if they cannot go, they'll give 1 rupee to a friend, a coin, 1 rupee coin, and say, put this in his hand, but I want it back, okay? I'm not willing to give 1.3 cents to the God, but I want his blessings. So it's crazy, that's an example of rajasic faith. And tamasic people worship ghosts, which are called pretas, or a singular is preta, and demon spirits is what is meant by bhutas. And one of Shankaracharya's disciples says this about the pretas, the ghosts. They are those who, while they had been on earth as brahmanas, etc., neglected their proper duties, and who, after death, attained these aerial bodies, or you call vayu dehas. So they have a body of sorts, but it's not something that's satisfying. And all these beings, when worshipped, answer the prayers of the devotees by granting their respective desires. So there can be like this, you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back kind of relationship, but it's a dangerous one because these beings are not friendly all the time. So it's a dangerous business deal. And the bhutas are even worse. Shankaracharya says one thing about them. He says they're like the 7 matrikas, etc. What are the 7 matrikas? Well, that an explanation of those comes in the Mahabharata of all places, which is also where the Gita is from. And we find a very elaborate description of those matrikas, which means the 7 mothers. But these are not mothers that you would want to have, really. It's just they're kind of goblin type of people. So I don't want to bore you or scare you or anything, but we should understand that there are people in this world and in the past times also who worship these kind of beings, and they think, that's what their nature draws them to. And this is the explanation I'm going to share with you is in the past tense because it comes in the Mahabharata as an explanation of something that somebody saw. So it's already over and I'm telling somebody what it looks like, that kind of thing. They had long nails and long teeth. This is this description of the matrikas. Their mouths were long. They were simple, sweet, youthful, and ornamented. They were full of greatness and could assume any form at will. Some didn't even have any flesh on their bodies. That doesn't sound very beautiful. But some were fair. Others possessed the complexion of gold. Some were like dark clouds. Others were like smoke. Some immensely fortunate ones were red in hue with long hair and dressed in white garments. Some were in braids that were held up. Some had long stomachs and long ears. You hear people talking about seeing things. I saw a ghost, I saw something like that. And then there are also dolls, like the ones in New Mexico, Kachina dolls. They saw things and they made forms. They were like these deities that they saw in their some kind of like trance, perhaps. And he goes on with the explanation. They were the ones who granted boons. So if you are desperate for a boon, you might sell yourself to the matrikas. And they can travel anywhere at will and were always cheerful until they're not. They were like apsaras, which are like these kind of like sirens, you could say, in the taking from the Greek tradition, I believe it is. They were like apsaras in their beauty and like the wind in speed. They were like cuckoos in their voice. Okay, cuckoos is, we don't have them in North America, so we don't know what that means. But basically, the cuckoo bird's sound is considered to be beautiful and soothing. So they're saying they have a voice like a cuckoo. And like the riches of, they were like the Lord of riches in prosperity. They were like Indra in their valor, which is saying a lot, and like the fire in their resplendence. They lived on trees and open plains. Some lived in caves and cremation grounds. Others made their abodes in mountains and springs. Some people in the old times, they might have, worshipped the spirit of that spring. It could be something like that. They spoke many different kinds of languages. There were large numbers of them, terrifying to enemies. So some people would invoke them just to scare their enemies or to kill their enemies. So not the kind of God you want to be putting all your faith in and investing your whole being in there. So even today there are people who do that kind of thing. And this is what Amma says. Prayer accompanied by negative thoughts produces bad vibrations. The vibrations around a person who is praying will depend on the nature of his or her prayer. If the person prays about harming an adversary, the person praying will be filled with vibrations of anger, and that will spread their anger throughout the world. The vibrations that emanate to the world from someone praying will match the attitude behind his or her prayer. So we because we're from with Amma, when we think of prayer, just automatically she's taught us, to pray for world peace. And I'm part of the world, so my desires will also be fulfilled. But mainly loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. That's the most popular chant and prayer that she teaches us. So such people will be attracted, these tamasic people will be attracted towards dark powers, evil forces, and destructive forces. And so now we can understand how the devata, or the god, determines the type of worship, and that in turn gives us a clue about the type of faith the person has. Now some people here might wonder, what's the difference between the fearsome form of the bhutas, like the matrikas, and the fearsome form of Bhadrakali? Aren't they the same? Kali has her tongue sticking out, she has blood dripping from her sword, and she's wearing a necklace of skulls, etc. But we should remember that many saints have worshipped Kali with a pure resolve, a sattvic sankalpa. And one very prominent example is Ramakrishna Paramahansa. Ignorant people may worship the same Kali to destroy their enemy. In such a case, the difference is that Kali is ultimately a deity representing the Paramatman, the Supreme Being, while the Bhutas are nothing but individual, non-realized souls, and they're still stuck in samsara, and therefore they are pursuing their personal desires. So in other words, they scratch our back by giving some boon, but then they're going to torment us to get some desire that they want. We have to do some ceremonies to them. They may tell us to kill somebody that was mean to them in their past life or something. So it's really dangerous business. So that's why we can say that these bhutas are very dangerous for the worshipper as well. Whereas Kali is the embodiment of divinity, and worshipping her will only take us to closer to God, because she is that supreme being in a different form. Here, Shankaracharya gives his conclusion of this verse and this part of the chapter by saying, only 1 in 1,000 is sattvic. Don't forget, that was thousands of years ago, so now it's probably like 1 in 1,000,000. And devoted to the worship of the gods, while the rajasic and tamasic creatures form the majority. And he says their ways are as follows. Now that the Devata part is over, what is next? It is their method and the motive by which they do this worship and how they do it, which we're going to find out next week. What we're going to do now is visit the questions that devotees had this time. We didn't have any questions for a little while, so I will try to respond to the ones that we have right now. The first question. This question is not very relevant to the current discussion, but I would really like to know the answer. If a body is not cremated but buried, does it affect what happens to the soul after death? Is it an obstacle to merging in Amma after death? It's really beyond the scope of what I can say definitively. You know, Amma would be the only person who can answer that 100% confidence. But what I can say is what I've learned, and then you can interpret that in your own way. What I have learned is just that the reason a body is cremated for the only reason that and it has to be cremated quickly to prevent that recently released soul from identifying with the dead body. So it's dead body, it's not going to come back to life. So they want to make sure that the person doesn't identify with the corpse. So they quickly get rid of it. And burying it doesn't do that. Because once a person's out of their body, they can go through dirt, they can go, down and then try and get inside that body even when it's in the casket. So that's why India has more of a tradition of cremation. Because once the bodily form is destroyed, the subtle body is forced to relinquish its attachment and identification to that form. So this expedites the process of healing, growth, and preparation for the next birth, so far as I have understood it. So you can draw whatever conclusion you get from that to answer the question. The next question is about grace. Often I hear in satsangs, we should pray for grace. I never pray for grace, as I feel it's a form of blessing showered on a devotee to acknowledge his or her dedication, efforts, sacrifice, good attitude, or good deeds. Is it necessary to pray for grace? Doesn't it flow as Guru or God decides anyway? And what is the difference between grace and good karma anyhow? Is there a difference? My understanding again, Amma herself says, pray for grace. She says that all the time. So to me that just means yes, we have to, we should. But there are other reasons why. I mean, just because our Guru says it should be enough for us. But if you want to dig deeper, I can also say that grace is not bestowed because of any actions. Because actions are finite and grace is infinite. So it's not like you do all these things and then there's a mathematical calculation and you're going to get some kind of grace. Grace, this is actually kind of an answer to the last part about what's the difference between grace and good karma. I mean, getting something because you do something, that's karma. It could be good or bad karma. And it's kind of a tit-for-tat relationship when you talk about karma. But grace comes from beyond. It is mysterious, and it often defies logic because it comes from the Supreme. And we don't know why, because it's transcendent. I mean, it sounds like kind of like dodging the question, but that is the definition in my understanding. Strictly speaking, grace has no cause. It cannot be calculated or expected or forced to appear. So you say, I want my grace, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make Amma come in front of me, something like that. Actually, I did that. I did something foolish like that a long time ago. I've done foolish things recently too, but not this one. This is a long time ago. I think it was 1992, and on those days where the main darshan hall was just all sand. And Amma called me after bhajans because there was a question about the Japan program. And so I was sitting there just overwhelmed, just being myself and the translator, Amma only. And then she said, do you have any questions? And I was like, are you kidding me? I asked some, pertinent questions and not pertinent questions. But at the very end, like a fool, I had read the Awakened Children, and there was one story where, somebody bowed down to Amma and she put her foot on their head. And I thought, that is so cool. So I said, if I bow down my head, will you put your feet on my head? Amma laughed and she says, I don't know, it just happens spontaneously. So I bowed down, and what do you think she did? It was like the Gong Show. You lose. Not the right way to ask. It has to happen naturally. So Amma says that our actions condition God's grace. So it kind of sounds like a contradiction because our efforts, our actions are conditioning. Maybe that's the only way we can explain it. But it doesn't mean that you're going to do this and get something back from God. We make our efforts and we wait for grace. We don't expect it. We just wait. So it's not a contradiction so long as we don't expect it. Amma says that it is our inner stance, our attitude, that determines grace. And when we have the attitude that all of our actions are an offering to God, they become a prayer. If you think that everything is a puja, and you are the pujari or pujarini, you are the priest or priestess, making your whole life into a sacred offering, everything's a prayer. So your actions are actually going to invoke God's grace, unbeknownst to us and without any expectation. So yes, it is necessary to pray for grace in thought, word, and action. But not just at one time of the day. We should try to do it all the time. And those prayers should be for the sake of all beings, not only our own welfare. Then it's okay. So the next person has 3 questions, which are the remainder. But good questions. Somebody, I think a lot of people will identify with this question. I know on our spiritual path we need to go over or transcend the sensations and go beyond the limitations from the sense organs. But recently I found my mind is so tricky that it always brings my focus to food and taste. In every meditation I do, the thoughts of either what to eat for dinner, lunch, etc., or what to buy when I go to the grocery store. At the same time, the body suffered from overeating and especially the habit of releasing emotions by eating. It seems like sometimes the more spiritual practice I do, the more vasanas or old tendencies are strongly bouncing back. It feels like the mind lost many feels like the mind lost many battles in the field, and it sticks to the strongest, which is our sensations. How could I control my mind and overcome the vasanas or old tendencies? Okay. When I read this, I felt like saying, congratulations. You have successfully identified one of your powerful vasanas. And that's something I said to Amma once. My mind is tricking me all the time when I try to meditate. And she says, good. And I said, good? And she said, good, you realize that. You know, because that's progress. Realizing that you're being duped, or you have been duped by your mind all this time, is progress. So that's the first step to removing them. Just like the doctor can better help us when they know what our illness is, a seeker can work on their spiritual growth better once they understand their inner weaknesses. And when a muscle in our body is weak, what do? We try to increase its functionability we gradually exercise it and make the muscle stronger. So if it's not so functional now, if you go for physical therapy, they're going to make you exercise that muscle, but in small increments. They're not going to say do 100 jumping jacks or something like that. So basically, you do the opposite of what the muscle seemingly wants. And that's because in gradual steps, we make the muscle stronger and we make it work harder and harder, but there's a little bit of pain there. So that pain is what the muscle doesn't want, and that's what the mind doesn't want. So we have to do the opposite of what they insist or what they beg us to do. The same goes for the eradication of vasanas. Really, strictly speaking, we should just try to do the opposite of what the vasanas demand. Unless it's a sattva desire. If it says, I want to do another archana, then you can do it. It's okay. Typically, that's not the problem that we have. I did 5 times, maybe I should do it 6 times. Nope, that's a vasana, stop. No, we don't have to worry about that. So in this case, it means that you can bring food under control by training your body to go without food for incrementally longer and longer periods of time. And to make do with less tasty food. So after my first visit to Puri, I really got inspired. And so I started fasting while I was in Puri. That was 1991. Right around this time, 1991. And those days, you could get payasam, or like rice pudding, from Amma on Saturday night if you fasted that day. So it's a real dilemma for people who are attached to food, because it's like, oh, I want to eat, but I don't want to miss the prasad. And then if you came and you didn't fast, she knew. I don't know how, of course I know how. But she knew, and she says, did you fast? And the person is like, I can't lie to my guru. No. And then she said, get out of here. And then they'll be sitting there pouting for a little while, and then she says, okay, here you go. And so, but she made it known that it's not acceptable. So I was inspired to do it just because of that. I wanted to get it from her hands. But then I stuck with it. I did it when I went back to America. When I moved to Japan, I did the same thing. And then I realized that it was getting easier and easier to fast, and because the mind gets used to it. Just like a dog might not like the leash right away. After some time, the leash gets used to it, so it doesn't complain anymore. But then I realized that I had an attachment to taste also. I wanted to eat tasty things. So I had another day. Fasting was Saturday. On Tuesday, this is not bragging because I don't do it anymore, so I can't be bragging about it. On Tuesdays, I would just have rice, cooked rice, and water. That's it. So it doesn't taste good at all, and it's very bland, but at least it keeps you from feeling hungry. So there were 2 different types of fasting, and you can do that. I mean, you can do your own version, whatever you want. Make yourself eat something that's healthy that you don't like, or just skip your favorite snack once a week, or drink that nice juice that you like to have 3 times a day, have it only 1 time a day. You're sacrificing something just to make your mind stronger. That's all it is. So start slow, be realistic, gradually increase. The mind may react, but you already have enough self-awareness to witness it. And the other day, I think I talked about ghee in the last class, maybe. So these negative tendencies that we have are part of our subtle body, and Amma's always going to be providing us with opportunities for those to come up on the surface of our mind, on the surface of our personality, anger, fear, and all these things. And then when they come, it's like a purification process, because she puts the heat that melts the butter. And if you've ever made ghee, you know that the salt and all the impurities rise to the top. So then what you're supposed to do when you're making ghee is you're supposed to scoop it off. And then what's left is pure ghee. But what happens with us is that Amma turns the heat on, something gets difficult for us, we get upset, we shout at somebody, and then that's all that impurity is coming to the surface. But instead of scooping it, we leave it there, or we try to rationalize or justify the impurities that come to the surface. That's where we make the mistake. So with food also we can do the same thing. Just imagine your attachment to food is an impurity that's coming to the surface when you fast. And then you scoop it up and dump it in the garbage and say, look, I don't need you. I want to be stronger. Because ultimately, when life is difficult, food is not going to help me. My inner strength is what's going to help me. And believe me, the mind doesn't have a rejoinder to that. It just says, pouts for a little while. Okay, question 2. What I learned is that on the spiritual path, how we do things and our attitude towards things are more important than what we do, as long as we devote all our actions to Amma, or God. But in reality and in the material world, I'm struggling how to find my talent and what I am good at, or my interest to make a living. I know Amma is always guiding us, but when the mind is not pure enough, it is hard for me to distinguish which voice is from Amma and which voice is from the mind. Could you please give me some suggestions on how to receive Amma's guidance and how to find my talent, interest, and advantages? Even if you ask Amma this question in the darshan line, it's going to be extremely hard, with such a kind of a that description, the way it is kind of vague, and it's not something that she can address quickly during the darshan line. So if you're coming from the side, I feel that probably this is going to be a tough one to get answered. Otherwise, I would tell you to just go ask Amma. So the things that I can say is not a whole lot, but one thing is to get some overall guidance. You could have a Jyotish reading, which would help in some ways, particularly timing. Maybe you're in a difficult time right now. There are times where, due to planetary influences, you get confused, you don't know which way to go, you feel like everything's falling on your head or something like that. And it's a perceptual thing due to whatever karma you're experiencing at that time. There are other times where, even though you are qualified and you have a lot of talents, that nobody recognizes them because there's a deficiency in God's grace at that time. So that's another thing that you might take into consideration. And another thing is just that the environment can make you feel like that. But if you want to do a little exercise and try to find the answer to your own question, I can share something with you that was actually part of an Ayud program long time ago, probably over 10 years ago. But it was a really nice exercise that they did. It was they called it Find Your Vision. And depending on your age, you may or may not find that interesting right now, because some people have already basically done that already. But if you feel like trying to find that, you can examine three things: your values, your personal values. So what means the most to you? And you might say, Amma, okay. So but that's one, but put a few more, like have 5 to 10 things that you really value. And you can maybe, the ones that are more important, you can put them in big letters or something, and you put them inside of a circle. And then you, so actually the ones that are, sorry, I'll explain a little bit more. It's hard to do without a blackboard or something. Then you write down the impact, the impact you want to have on the world, or what you want to give, what you want to provide to the world or the next generation, or Amma, whatever it is. So the impact you want to have, or more humbly we could say, the offering you wish to make. And the third is your personal strengths. So this person seems to be a little bit confused about their personal strengths, but you can, if you're not quite sure, you can ask other people, what are my strengths? I feel like I don't have any. And then people who know you can tell you that. You know, what are your good qualities and what are your talents, etc. And when you have each one of these in a circle, and then in that circle, let's say you have a circle like this. This is the first one, your values. And then so here is where you're going to write the most important ones, the closer to this side. And then you're going to have a circle up here, which is your impact, and that's going to overlap with the one below. And just one corner of it is going to be the core impact that you want to make on the world. And then you have a third ring that goes and includes those one portion of those two other rings. And the personal strengths that you feel that are most critical and most inherent and deep in you, that should also go in the overlapping area. So that overlapping area is your best way to find your purpose in worldly life. In spiritual life, we already know there's only one thing that we need to focus on. There is one more question, but we've gone over the time already, so we'll address that next week. And for now, we will close with the first two prayers, and those who have time can remain with us and meditate for some time. Take a deep breath. Om Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Let us take a few moments to meditate together. And by doing so, let us try to assimilate the teachings that Lord Krishna and Amma are giving us. Close your eyes, please. Check your posture to see that your back and neck are relatively straight. And take a few long, deep breaths. Feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each long, deep inhalation and exhalation. Feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel yourself in her embrace. And feel her unconditional love radiating within you as well. When we slow down the breathing like this, the mind becomes more subtle and can focus for longer periods of time. Visualization is even more clear as well. Now with that power of visualization, try to see your beloved deity in your mind's eye. If it is Amma, visualize her sparkling eyes, beautiful facial features, her smile. Imagine that she is looking at you with such a benevolent smile on her face. By visualizing our beloved deity in this way, we are invoking the sattvic form of worship. We don't want anything from our beloved deity. We just want to become one. We want their presence. We want to feel them inside. We want to realize that they are our true self. With this motive only, let us try to visualize our beloved deity. Now let us conclude the meditation by chanting the final prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha. Once again, thanks for joining us. We will have bhajans here locally. If you're local, you're welcome to join us on Saturday evening. Otherwise, we have another Gita class next week. And don't forget, middle of May, I'm going to repeat it every time, we have a 10th anniversary celebration for this ashram. And everybody is encouraged to come and participate in person, if you can. And other satsang groups that cannot make it here, we will try our best to deliver that to your satsang through Zoom. Not individual Zoom, but satsang based. So you guys also gather together and join us in the celebration, wherever you may be. And but we hope to see as many people in person as possible. Om Namah Shivaya.